Welcome to the Insights to Communicate podcast with Adam Probalski, where communications, research, and strategy come together.
We've been given permission to be jerks in this society now. And, with language, with the way we treat other people, and it's just, it's not okay.
I agree 100%. I have a kind of a motto, and I'll ask you yours at the end. But mine is be curious and have compassion, and that's not something that's so featured prominently in our broader society today. The compassion part is kind of lacking some, or at least the impression is that it's lacking.
Combine that with just bad behavior in general and the normalization, which started in 2015,
Yeah.
Absolutely abhorrent behavior. I'm Jewish. Anti-Semitism has always been below the surface. Now it's been, it's become acceptable, and which I find just appalling. And that extends to I think a lot of other places in society, which is really sad.
Yeah, the fact that the people that want to spew hate are kind of empowered or were empowered, and that continues is kind of scary. All right, well, that's a fun start. Let's
Hard to drag it into the gutter so early, but
no. It's look, we got to recognize the playing field that we're working with. So let me just introduce you, Scott Summerfield. I'll call you a government communicator, but what's cool is you're on the outside. You're a consultant to government. We often talk to PIOs and communicators that are on the inside. You get to have this whole different perspective. And you've been doing this for decades. I'll let you tell a little more of your story, but I think there's a great value to someone like us. Like, we work for hundreds of government agencies and we have this big picture perspective. And I think you get to do that too. Why don't you kind of maybe tell us the short story of how you got to where you are? I think I'm most interested in, you're at San Diego State and somehow you then become a consultant to 100 government agencies.
Interesting journey, and thanks for having me join you, Adam. Even though I serve as an external resource to public agencies, I spent time internally, spent about 7 years on city staff, learning how local government operates, learning the nuances of serving the public. And I think that has given me a knowledge base that has served me well over the last several decades. As you noted, proud San Diego State graduate. I serve on the Alumni Association Board of Advisors, so still have my toe in campus activities. Came out of radio, worked for an NPR station for 4 years. Have an abiding love for radio because it requires you to tell a story. The visuals aren't there.
Right.
And I think that permeates a lot of the ways that we work with agencies to communicate. What is the story? What is the message you want to deliver? What is the picture that you're painting? And radio doesn't put all the visuals there for you. You have to create that image in your mind. Took that then to the private sector for a business organization in the Bay Area, moved to local government, and have been working with literally hundreds of agencies, just as you do, over the past few decades, helping them communicate as effectively as possible with whatever public they serve. And it's fascinating. It's enjoyable. As my business partner, Sherry Benninghoven, and I say all the time, we have no idea when we wake up in the morning what sort of issue we're going to be dealing with. And that keeps it really interesting.
So I think you do a decent amount of planning work and helping agencies build their story, but you also do the crisis work too. And so I think that features, how when you wake up, you don't know what's going to happen. How much of your work is that OMG moment where you get that call and you've got to spring into action?
More and more of the OMG moments over the last few years, and there's probably a variety of reasons why we call them crises of confidence. The dumb, stupid, illegal, immoral, unethical, people cause things that can turn an agency upside down just as quickly as a natural disaster.
Right.
So we do quite a bit of that. And one of the reasons why I think is public agencies have done a really good job anticipating disasters. They train for them, earthquakes, floods, fires, debris flow. They do drills, they've got their systems in place. What they haven't focused on as much up until the last several years is these crises of confidence that can turn an agency upside down just as quickly as a disaster. There are a number of them that we kind of keep our eyes on. So we will often, parachute in, if you will, work with an agency when something not pleasant is happening, help them figure out who they need to communicate, what the message is, what tools make the most sense, and that overall strategy. So a lot of that piece as well.
Yeah, I wonder something that we talk about a lot in the research we do is the breaking through the noise. We determine two key things in the research we do, the message, and then we also look at the mode, like how do we get that through? And we do some of that and we give that advice, but I feel like there's got to be some brilliant scheme that you have come up with to figure out how to break through the noise because people just aren't thinking about local government. It's just not top of mind. And that's a sucker punch sometimes for city staff or for elected officials because they're not the first thing people think about. They're not even the 10th thing people think about. So, how do you break through that noise and get the public to either be interested or find the way to reach them?
Yeah, and if you have a magic solution, I'd love to hear it because it's an evolving process. So, as you know, when you are conducting research on behalf of an agency, how do you, at a granular level, get someone to devote 10, 12, 15 minutes of their time to answer some really important questions?
Sure.
Or a focus group, devote an hour, hour and a half to that research process. So it's an ongoing challenge. Um, to more specifically answer your question, let me give you an example of how that plays out in the real world. So, one of the things we worry about a lot now are cyber attacks. Local government has been one of the sort of types of institutions that have been hit most frequently. And you look at what happened to Long Beach several months ago, the city of Oakland. Atlanta is probably the most egregious example of what can happen. It's devastating in a number of ways, not just for the public, but for employees. And one of the ways you get agencies thinking ahead of time around preparing for that type of crisis is to point out if this happened to a city next to you or a county next to you, you could be next. What are you going to do? Who do you need to communicate with? What tools are you going to use? And if you consider that perhaps capitalizing on someone else's misfortune, I guess you could look at it that way. But it's like, when do people pay attention to how to prepare for an earthquake? After an earthquake happens, you
Sure.
put your go kit together, you make sure your foundation's good, all that stuff. When do you get people to think about fire safety? After there's been a significant wildfire. So we encourage organizations to always be aware of what's happening to other agencies and do their planning, do their research, get their communications process together before it ever happens.
So one thing I struggle with, and you probably do too, this constant barrage, and it's more recently of negativity about government. And this idea that all government is corrupt and all government is wanton with spending and has no regard for tax dollars, and every government employee is overpaid and overpensioned. And we know, working in local government, that's just not the case. There's certainly isolated incidents of corruption, and those people typically go to prison for that sort of thing. And there's certainly waste in every kind of organization, but it's not this pervasive thing that you get to throw everything out. I come up with ideas all the time on how government should be more transparent and show their cards. Do you have any techniques or anything you tell government clients, and how do we tell the world that we are not the problem? We are at least part of the solution, if not the solution.
Yeah, it's frustrating, Adam, and it comes from this pervasive distrust of local government. This likely, I think, started at the national level several years back. It's now filtered down to our level. And the reason why it's so frustrating is we do a really good job. Local government serves its various publics really well. The level of service, the commitment on the part of city, county, special district staff is at a very high level. But we find increasingly the public just doesn't believe that what we're saying is the truth, and that it's sad because we are there to serve. We do an amazing job of that. How do you counter that distrust? um, in many cases it's amping up your communications activities. You you mentioned earlier this constant barrage of messaging and images and just stuff that is thrown our way everywhere we go. How do you rise above that? We don't have the resources in local government that an Amazon has, or a Nike, or a, a car manufacturer.
Right.
So we've got to be really creative in how we communicate with the public. A lot of agencies are now considering podcasts like this one. It's one way to communicate.
Yeah.
E-blasts. It's got to be concise. I think the biggest driver in how we've changed the way we communicate to rise above all that chatter and noise is being very, very brief and much more visually focused. Attention spans are in the gutter. I can fight that, or I can change up the way I communicate.
Right.
Fighting it, I'm not going to win. So we need to change it.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for people who've been in the business, whatever it is, whatever business, quite frankly, for a long time. They've got a lot of words to say and a story to tell that doesn't fit in that 15-second clip that really is the attention span of the voters, of the public, of the residents. So you're looking at a 3-minute script and you've got to get it down to 15 seconds. That's the Scott Summerfield challenge, I guess.
It is a challenge. I just saw a really good example of an agency changing up the way they communicate. And it was from the city of Miami Beach. And as you know, Florida beach towns have a history of a lot of issues during spring break.
Right.
We've got thousands of college students descending upon these beaches during spring break, and it's resulted in essentially riots, a lot of property damage, drinking, drugs, speeding, litter, you name it. And this year, instead of issuing their normal 300-word press release on how we're clamping down on spring break, they did a 60-second commercial that they pushed out via social that was essentially focused on the theme, we're breaking up with you. We're breaking up with spring break. And it was one of the most creative tools I have seen, recognizing that their audience is not going to read a press release that is run in traditional media. There isn't a college student in the country, and I'm overgeneralizing, but probably not too far off base, that consumes traditional media as their primary news source.
Right.
But this video absolutely nailed it. So we're starting to see a shift that will help rise above the noise.
So there is a theme that I see, and we work all over the country. I live in California, so we have a lot of business here, and so I know a lot of communicators here. And I see a shift in the PIO, the public information officer, the communications person, the in-house people for government. There's a couple things that are happening. Transitioning out are the traditional PIO that stands in front of a microphone with a suit and tie, or appropriately business-like for a woman, and someone who is not necessarily age-wise younger, but someone who is really kind of listening to what you and I are saying and listening to what the public is saying and changing their approach. So there are some really cool, innovative communicators in government all around the country. And I think they have to be in order to survive and thrive in this environment. I also, however, see a ton of them leaving. And I don't know if it's quite the crisis, but I see a lot of these people who've got 3 to 7 years of experience in local government communications. And I don't know if they're necessarily frustrated, but they see the opportunity in the world that we work in and say, wait a second, all these consultants that we hire are making good money and having fun. Why can't we do that? And so I've seen a lot of them leave. How do you handle that? Maybe the turnover that you deal with at city halls, and what do you see as the future of communications for local government?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Let me first start with a term that you used a few minutes ago: public information officer. I was one. I think increasingly that's becoming a bit of an archaic term. To me, public information implies what you just described. Somebody standing there, me giving information in a one way manner.
Right.
People want to be heard. And it's not just sending out information, it's having the right tools to hear from those that we serve, whether it's two-way communication electronically, whether it's a CRM app that you can use, old school ways of, public meetings. I mean, we get all wrapped up in the latest, greatest, shiniest tool, but we have to remember that a significant portion of those that we serve, aren't as well connected, and we've seen that play out in a number of disasters that we've worked on. Um, Around the staffing issue, there's been a number of shifts. We traditionally saw traditional journalists move into public information roles. I was one of them.
Right.
That accelerated over the last decade or so as newsrooms shrank. Uh, you saw massive layoffs. Newsrooms were a fraction the size they used to be. Buyout offers were made. Um, or, good reporters just saw the writing on the wall that this may not be a viable place for me long term. So we're seeing a lot of those in public agency communications come out of the journalism world. What we're also seeing, though, now, I just did a session on this, is public agencies hiring either new college grads or those with those few years of experience that you noted that are absolute aces in social media. They are terrific. They don't have even a basic understanding in many cases of how you effectively work with traditional reporters.
Mm.
And I think one of the responsibilities of agency leadership is to help bring them along. They want to succeed, they want to be good communicators, but they don't have that background that traditionally has populated the public information role. Why does that still matter? It's sort of the opposite of that Miami Beach example I gave. In that instance, they are targeting college students, those that don't typically consume traditional media. In our agencies, city council members, members of the board of supervisors, directors of utility and special districts, they are voracious consumers of
Yeah.
traditional media. It still matters to them.
Right.
So a public communicator needs to have a really good working knowledge of both traditional and social. And that requires mentorship. It requires providing them with training, whatever resources they can, so they can best serve their agency.
So when you go into a new client, is there some tech stack that you say, here, you should do this? Do you say you should do Canva? Here's the platform you should use for your podcast. Throw away your fax machine is probably one of your first things. What happens typically when you go in from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, we take a look at what is the skill set of your communicator. Often that involves providing them with just core training. A lot of what we find though is a lack of organization in the agency around communication. Um, it's evolved over the years and it may be very decentralized. One of the tech tools that we have found most helpful is a workflow platform like Monday.com. There are others um, that allow a single communicator to help get their arms around communication in a lot of agency departments that they may not touch day to day. A lot of times these are one person shops. And so you look at that environment, you've got a communicator with maybe just a few years of experience, little to no traditional media experience. They come into local government that they don't understand. And we deal with this with reporters as well. They want to do a good job covering an agency and they just don't understand local government. So I think the responsibility is on us. So they don't understand local government. They are in a professional setting with responsibility for communicating to a lot of different audiences. A workflow tool like that can help them uh, use their time more effectively and help keep track of issues and really good stories as well that may be going on in other parts of the agency. But there has to be a voracious appetite to learn.
Right.
You can't come in and assume this is going to be a job where you're going to escape. Local government is complicated. It's becoming even more complicated. When you add budget considerations on top of it, that becomes tough because you may lose resources. What are the first positions to go when budgets get tough? Communications. Are you going to put a cop on the street, or are you going to, hire another communicator?
Sure.
And that's something that policy leaders struggle with all the time. So training through a number of organizations. Capio is a terrific one.
Right.
League of California Cities provides training. 3CMA. There are a lot of PRSA, if that's where your interest lies. There are a lot of opportunities there, but you have to seek them out. And as an agency leader, you have to encourage your communicator to take advantage of those opportunities also.
I think we can do like 10 of these sessions because we live in that same world. So it could be kind of fun. But let's wrap it a little bit with give you the chance to give me your mantra, your words of advice, your theme that runs through your head all the time. What is that?
Yeah. If you're a public agency communicator, be accessible. Figure out what the story is that you want to tell. And take a look at what resources you have to tell it and who you need to tell it to. We tend to default to things, tactics. That's the last thing you should be thinking of. So I think if there's a mantra, it's plan, research. When we work with an agency, the first thing that we focus on is the business that you're in, Adam. Understand your audience, understand what their needs are, what their desires are, what their perceptions are of your agency. Use that to then craft a communications plan and then figure out what tactics can help you carry it out. So it's a very prescribed yet really productive process.
Great words of advice. Let's definitely keep this conversation going another time.
You bet.
This has been Insights to Communicate with Adam Probalski, president of the woman and Latina-owned market and opinion research firm, Probalski Research.